I have a dear friend at work who is actually technically my boss, but I am blessed to work somewhere where I can call my boss my friend and actually mean it. His name is Grant, and he is an incredible human, and he is, among many wonderful things he's done in his life, he's a very high-level martial artist. And he was talking the other day, I overheard him, he was talking to one of our younger servers. I work at a restaurant, for those of you who don't know. He was talking to one of the youngsters and kind of coaching them up through a mistake that they made, but he was giving them some loving, positive advice. And a quote from one of his martial arts teachers is, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." I'll say that again. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Now, when you first hear that, it may seem like kind of an oxymoron or paradoxical or contradictory, meaning, what do you mean? Slow is not fast. Those are polar opposites. But I'm going to unpack that for you a little bit today, because I think in that one statement, I wish could meet this martial arts teacher. He sounds amazing, but in that one little statement, there is a lot of wisdom that we can apply to our lives on a micro individual level and then also on a macro level as well. So on the technical sort of verbatim meaning of that, what his martial arts teacher is talking about is when you are doing things really fast and chaotic and just go, 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 like when someone is learning these new martial arts moves and they try to just throw them all out there as fast as they can because they think that will accomplish something, it actually ends up being very rough and imprecise and just not well calculated and inefficient and doesn't get done what you are accomplishing to get done. Similarly, although I've never studied martial arts, I can certainly remember when I was a high-level competitive synchronized swimmer, if we were first learning a really intricate move, we would absolutely go very, very slow to train it into our bodies and learn the muscle memory of that, and then progressively let it get faster and faster. And then on a more comical level, if any of you 90s kids out there remember playing Street Fighter, I played Street Fighter a handful of times on, what was that? Was it on Sega? It wasn't Nintendo, I think. I don't know. This was 100 years ago. But I was not good at it. I was one of those kids that just pressed all the buttons as fast as I can. And every once in a while, a really cool move would show up, but I had no idea what I was doing. And it was really inefficient. And I was just slamming on buttons 90 miles an hour, hoping something would happen. Whereas if I'd actually learned to play the game and learn like, oh, if you press A and B and the up button, then that side punch happens or whatever the hell, it would be slower, but a lot more efficient because it would be calculated movements, knowing what you were doing. And when my friend Grant was explaining this to the young server, it was essentially the idea of because we're in such a large chaotic restaurant, if you're moving 90 miles an hour and your brain is going 90 miles an hour and all of your motor functions are going 90 miles an hour, you are probably going to screw up and make a mistake, whether it's you drop something or you spill something or you enter something wrong and then the kitchen makes the wrong food and then the guest is unhappy, and then it can be this whole cascade of just chaos that happens. Whereas if you slow down and are more methodical and take your time and are more premeditative, it may seem like things are going to get less done because you're moving slower, but it is actually more productive and more efficient because it's smooth. The slow is the smooth, and what the smooth does, it cuts out the error, cuts out the incorrect, incalculated movements, and makes things more efficient so that less mistakes are made, and whatever moves you are doing are actually much more better executed. So that's the principle on that. Now, moving that out to a more sort of macro area in your life, of course, if you are learning some sort of new technical skill, whether it's learning the guitar or learning how to code, all of that, of course, applies with going slower until you really understand what you're doing to go faster. But the main point I want to talk about in this video is sort of the macro level of hustle culture and productivity, because this push is out there in Western modern societies everywhere. And while there's been sort of a pendulum pushback we're seeing, there is a slow living community and a back to basics, back to nature community. And I've certainly talked about these things on my channel. There's this total chasm of you're either in the hustle productivity camp or you're in the Zen, hippie, slow living camp, which I've seen a lot of slow living videos out there. And again, I tend to gravitate towards those things because I do think it's needed to come into balance. Where I don't agree and would like to provide an option C, if you will, is that they need to be mutually exclusive, and that if you are practicing slow living, it does not have to mean relinquishing ambition and goals and getting things done, as that's so often what it's seen to mean. The camps kind of are opposing, like we like to do. We like to pick teams and say, you're either A or B, or red or blue, or this side or that side, or vegan or carnivore. And really what the universe is asking us to do, as these pendulums always swing back and forth, is that there's greatness on both sides and shadow sides on both sides, and it's really about coming back into balance on a micro level as an individual, and on a macro level how we're functioning as human beings in our collective society and thought patterns. So going into that, unpacking sort of slow living, just a quick backstory on my kind of journey with it. In high school and college, I was a competitive elite level synchronized swimmer. I was on the United States national team and training for the 2008 Olympic trials, which I competed in 2006. They picked the team early. But so many hours were spent in the pool. During the school year, it was about 35 hours in the water, and I was a full-time student. And then during the summer when I was on the United States national team, it was 60 hours in the water. So 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Ironically, the 60 hours a week over the summer was actually easier for me because I was out of school and just training. And while it was grueling on my body, that was all I had to do. But during the school year, my high school years and particularly my college years were absolute just insanity with my schedule. I was up at 5 a.m., often up studying until 2 a.m. And my senior year, I had to work at Starbucks and had that job as well. So I was working 35 hours a week and going to school full time and working at Starbucks. And our club owned a bingo hall as sort of a nonprofit that funded all of our international travel. So my schedule was absolute chaos, and I don't regret it one bit, but I would not be able to live like that at this stage in my life because it drained me in so many ways. And it led to a lot of mental and emotional distress and physical distress because I was just putting my mind and my spirit and my body through so much, and it was not sustainable. I did graduate and got good grades and finished college how I wanted to, and I did compete in the 2008 Olympic trials, so I was happy I got to do that. But that way of living is definitely not sustainable for the long run, and it did cause definitely some inner damage that I had to work through. Again, I don't regret it, but there's always opportunity costs with how you choose to live your life. Fast forward, when I got to Las Vegas after that, I had graduated and I was performing in Cirque du Soleil, and for the first time in my life, I actually had 2 days off. I had a weekend, and while yes, Cirque du Soleil is definitely more physical than the average job, it was much easier than when I was doing my training. And for the first time, again, I had 2 days off and wasn't doing my job and going to school and doing another job. I was just doing that job. So for the first time in my life, I had free time and could have absolutely practiced slow living, which you didn't hear that phrase this much. This was way back in, say, the mid-2000s that I was there. You didn't hear the phrase slow living, and coming out of the chaotic, the push mentality, the hustle mentality, the I'm training for the Olympics and a star student and doing this and blah, blah, blah. I could not appreciate that time off at all. And I equated not filling my day every single second with doing something productive. I equated that as laziness and actually got quite depressed and quite down on myself because for the first time in my life, well, yes, it was amazing to be in the show and be performing. I wasn't having this big audacious goal of training for the Olympics or training to graduate college with honors or any of that. I was just doing my job every day as a performing artist, and I could not appreciate it as much because I was so conditioned of the hustle culture of doing things 90 miles an hour, of every second of every day having to be filled with something. So while I could have had slow living back then, I couldn't appreciate it because I was so conditioned to think that if I stopped moving for 1 second, that this was being lazy, that this was not being productive, that I was wasting my life in some kind of way. And I think this is a disease that has permeated a lot of Western culture, and not just in America, it's in Europe, it's absolutely in Asia too. You hear about this with young Chinese students, Japanese students, having incredibly high suicide rates just because of the pressures that are being put on them to succeed in the world. And that's so damaging and horrible and gut-wrenching to hear. And I think we're absolutely out of balance on that. And then on an even bigger macro level, when you look at capitalism and just what we think a developed nation is, This productivity is associated with companies need to always be making more money, always be coming out with a new latest product, always be having infinite growth for the shareholders. And I believe it was Milton Friedman that won the economic prize for having the model of infinite economic growth. This was back in the 50s, and we didn't have the foresight that we have now, but infinite economic growth is not necessarily what we need to be succeeding as human beings and adding the most value to this planet. And actually, it's been quite the opposite. We are destroying resources. We're destroying the oceans. We're destroying the Amazon. We're destroying natural water sources. We're destroying food sources. We're, demolishing whole areas to pillage and plummet for the sake of profit. And we can't keep doing this. But as long as there's this mentality of more, infinite growth, we are going to keep doing that. So where does the change start? It starts by coming back into our own lives and perhaps redefining what productivity means, and then taking that on the outer to the collective consciousness. But back to my personal story with it, after the show in Vegas, I moved to LA and my pendulum swung back more into the productivity realm of I was a teacher and a choreographer and a performing artist still. And then I started working at a restaurant, and the restaurant, I am still there. It's a wonderful company, and the hustle culture is still there, because if anyone's ever worked at a restaurant, you know how fast-paced and chaotic it can be, especially if it's I don't work at a slow fine dining one. It's like a super large, like seats 300 people, 90 miles an hour one. And that, while it has been enjoyable, doing all those things I was doing in LA, burning the candle at both ends, commuting 2 hours a day, working with kids, and then working at the restaurant, I absolutely got completely out of balance again. But my ego felt better because I was telling myself, yes, I'm being productive and I'm doing all these different things. But I got horrible anxiety and horrible depression and bad sleeplessness, and anyone who's been under chronic stress, you know what it feels like in your body. You know when you feel out of balance. And I think so many people are in this state. And then on top of that, when you add in things like social media and Netflix or going out and drinking, those are all optional things. When we talk about slow living, a lot of people say, oh, I could never slow down because I have to take care of my kids. I have to go to my job. I have to take care of my elderly mother, or I'm, XYZ, all of these mandatory things that we have as an adult. And yes, those are true, but this is where the optional steps come in. And I have another video titled How I Broke My Addiction to Stimulus. And this is where the balance comes in, because I was not willing to quit my job and be a hippie on the street and panhandle. And I'm also not willing to let go of ambition either, because I do enjoy the part of myself that has had these audacious goals and been able to actually achieve most of them. And I want to add as much value to the world as I can. But it's, again, where is that balance? And I've really only found this balance in the past few years with personal choices that I have made. And it's not been to relinquish all goals and desires and hopes to change the world in some sort of positive way, but it's been tuning into myself and making certain choices that have negated the hustle culture and the push culture and the productivity culture, and actually brought me into a lot more balance. And that's predominantly been through really decreasing socializing. I'm not anti-socializing. You have to find your own balance with it, because I myself, I've learned I'm an introvert, and while I do well in social situations, it's not social anxiety or I don't hate people. They are very, very draining for me. And especially because I've had two professions, like working in a restaurant and working with kids as a teacher, I'm around people all day. So I've had to learn my personal balance of, I need, in my free time, 90% solitude, and then only a very small percent of socializing. And if I do too many social events, too many days in a row, or too many weeks in a row, I absolutely will get burnt out and I will get fried. And so I need to keep those to a minimum. I quit drinking because that absolutely was not adding value to my life, and that's a major time suck and was not letting me feel my best and not letting me give my best self to the world. And I do a ton of time in deep, deep silence, some meditation music here and there, but no Netflix, no TV, no games, no social media other than this YouTube channel where I'm trying to hopefully add some helpful tidbits to the world. And that may seem like such deprivation to a lot of people, but for me, it's been actual liberation, because here's the kicker, and here's where I'm coming for full circle back to that quote. Whereas in years past, when I was going 90 miles an hour with all these things and these being productive things and going after goals or whatever, I crashed and I burned every single time. And in the earlier years, I actually had extreme mental health issues that were very, very scary and absolutely inhibited me from living my best life. And when you're not living your best self, it is very hard to add any kind of value to the world. And if you are constantly stressed out and doing too much, and the only free time you have is spent scrolling endlessly on social media or binge watching a show on Netflix, your body's never getting the chance to recharge. Your mind is never getting the chance to recharge. So you're just adding cumulative burnout, and eventually you are going to crash and burn. And no amount of coffee, that's another thing I gave up because it's false energy. No amount of coffee or stimulants are going to be able to pull you out of that crash and burn state. And guess what? When you're in that crash and burn state, you're not going to be productive. So you have to come back to slowness and stillness to recharge yourself. And when you may think laying on the couch watching Netflix for 8 hours is slow living, well, I mean, in a sedentary way, it sort of is, but it is not. You're still being stimulated. You're still being, you're zoning out, but you're not refreshing yourself. You're not recharging yourself. And then if you're doing things like scrolling on Instagram and comparing yourself to other people and having anxiety about all of your shortcomings you think you have in life, that absolutely is not hitting your reset button or helping you rest and recharge. But if you take all of that out, and this is where the slow living people have been like pushing so hard, and I absolutely see their agenda. If you come back to slow and stillness and nothingness, and again, your balance will look different from somebody else's. Maybe it's 1 day a week, or being able to have 3 days off in a month, or every other month you take a 1 week vacation, or I don't know, you're going to have to play around and find your own balance, but you have to designate that time in order to just stop. Because the world is so chaotic, and with the smartphones and technologies and the demands that we place on ourselves through jobs and social media and stock market growth and bills and all of that, like, it is chaotic what we're putting ourselves through. And it's no wonder that Americans, but most Western developed nations, have horrible mental health issues, and people are barely hanging on. And that is not thriving. Just because your bank account is higher, or your stock market portfolio is growing, or your business is growing even, that is not necessarily thriving if you feel burnt out and barely hanging on by a thread. How many times a day do you talk to someone and you give the polite, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" and you hear the response, "Oh, hanging in there"? Ask yourself that. Maybe that's an American thing. I can't speak to Europe. I've spent a little bit of time in Europe, but I've never lived there. But it is very much, you go anywhere in America, you ask that question, and 9 out of 10 times, you get the response, "Oh, I'm hanging in there." That's not thriving. And sometimes people, life circumstances, maybe they are really in the middle of a crisis that has shown up that's not, that's out of the ordinary. That's a different thing. But for the most part, people feel incredibly burnt out and stressed out, and they're on this treadmill of go, thinking they need to be productive or hustle or they really are trying to do good things with, say, they're growing a business, or trying to be a really awesome mother or father, or really trying to be a great volunteer because they do, that's all good stuff. But if there's no designated slow down time, it won't be smooth. And so things will start to get chaotic. Your level of execution, your brain's not going to be firing as fast. You won't have as many creative ideas. I can tell you, for me personally, my biggest creative stints, if you will, my biggest access to source, the biggest times I've had feelings of something coming through me that's bigger than me, it has never come up from researching or planning or scrolling on YouTube for ideas or scrolling on Instagram or Pinterest to get in the inspo. It's when I shut all that shit off and go into complete silence for extended periods of time, that something deeper comes through. Whatever your spiritual beliefs are, I think there is something bigger than us. And there, you call it the source, or you can call it God, or you can call it your higher self, or you can call it innate wisdom, whatever your vocabulary is, that's all just semantics. There is this bigger presence that can come through us, but it's not going to be on the external. And you can only access that when you slow down, when you come to stillness, when you stop, when you clear the noise, when you make space, then things become smooth. And then you can add value to the world in a new way. You'll have more creativity. You'll have more energy to help those around you. You'll have more presence for your children. You'll have more peace of mind, so that if someone comes to you and is a salty Magoo, like I deal with salty Magoos at the restaurant all the time. It's a restaurant. And if I've been too manic with working and didn't get enough sleep because I stayed out late socializing and I'm tired the next day, and someone bitches at me because their salmon is undercooked, man, will I get triggered if they're being a jerk to me, because people will really be jerks about that. But if I had a day of stillness the day before and took care of myself and was slow and stopped the noise, that next day, if that salty Magoo person screams at me because of their salmon being underprepared, I can respond with calmness and kindness and just listen to them and deflect that energy. It's a totally different game. It's kind of like when you've all heard on the airplane when they say, and if they, in the event of an emergency, the mask comes down and you're with a small child, every mother or father's instinct would be to help the small child first, but that's the exact opposite of what they tell you to do. You need to put on your mask to keep yourself alive so that you can then help the child, because if you put the mask on the child and then pass out, then there's no one to help the child. Sorry, yes, that's a morbid example, but it is a very, I think it's a very powerful analogy for life. So when you come to this slow living, it does not mean you have to relinquish your goals. But if you do want to, and you're tired of having goals and ambition, I think that's a beautiful spiritual thing too, that to just be able to be. But it's for anyone out there that knows Eckhart Tolle, he's been a wonderful teacher of mine. He talks a lot about the balance of doing and of being. And that's where these two things can come together. You can be productive and you can hustle and build your business or follow your dreams or your goals or get better at this, but you have to balance it with the nothingness. And you have to come into just being able to stop. That's a key word for me. Just stop everything. And there's certain things, yes, you can't stop. You can't stop being a mother or father. You can't stop your job unless you want to lose your income. You can't stop paying your bills. But you can, again, come back to see where those optional stops are, and you have to make space for them so that you can be smooth and then be fast and take your best self into the world. Okay, that is the speech for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.